everybody. Today I'm going to show you what to do if you have extra tomatoes. If you end up with tomatoes, or if there's a good sale at your store, you go to the farmer's market, things like that. I grew these and I will try to show. This is only about half so far because I already did some salsa, which unfortunately I didn't video. From one plant. I planted one tomato plant. I think this year I did get it from my mom. She grew it from seed, but the ones I planted, those squirrels, if you've seen my gardening videos, they're my nemesis. So they had dug up mine, she gave me hers. But you have options. If you have a garden, you can plant them from seed, you can plant them from a plant, you can make friends with someone who has a garden. Maybe in your area there's a community garden where you invest time in caring for it with other people, and then you're able to take some of the produce. I know that some of the schools in our area have done that. I don't know if they still do because all my kids are old now, but those are some things that you might want to know if you would like to do something like this. I am just going to be making some basic tomato sauce. The tomato sauce can be processed like in jars, so canning. And I do that sometimes, but I know that I don't quite have enough for it to be worth my time today. So I'm actually just going to process it to freeze so I can show you that, which is nice because most people, that's something they could manage, right? You can find some space in your freezer. You could do some tomato sauce to freeze, whereas canning is a little more extensive. And I'm willing to show that. I could show the salsa and things like that if anyone's interested. So make sure you let me know if there's something like that you'd like to see. But I'm really trying to do things that most people will be able to do, that maybe they didn't realize, oh, I can make something that's fresher, cheaper, things like that. So the first thing, I'm just going to quarter these. Now, I have an immersion blender, so I can get rid of the skins later if they're a problem. But if you don't, then you can do a different step first, which would be to blanch them. That means have a hot water or boiling water that you drop them in for, whatever the time is. It depends on the size of your tomatoes and things. That makes the skin easier to pull off. I'm not doing that because I'm just going to cook them like this. And if there are any skins floating around or anything like that, I can always just blend it up later. Some people will also put it through a strainer or sieve. Or like they actually make a little, I guess it's a food mill. I have one for applesauce, and you can put your tomatoes through there if you want something really smooth and not with any pulp, but I don't care because most likely I will use this to make a spaghetti sauce later or, something similar to that. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I'm going to switch these around. So I'm just going to quarter them, toss them in. And once I get all of those done, chop up the onion. It called for garlic cloves, which I do have some, but since I'm being lazy today, I'm just doing garlic. They say to put a little lemon juice, salt, and I've got to grab my sugar. These are homegrown, so I'm not going to add the sugar till I taste them. Store-bought, you're pretty much always going to have to. They just don't taste the same. But a lot of times if I grow them from the garden, they're fairly sweet, so I don't really need to add a lot of sugar. So I'm not going to put it in initially. I'm going to let it cook down and taste it because I could run the risk of having it over-sweet if I'm not careful. The other thing is a lot of recipes will call for like oregano, bay leaves, things like that. For this, I'm not doing it. And there's a reason, because although I've already made salsa, so I'm most likely going to use that if I was going to make something of more of like a Tex-Mex Mexican flavor. I would probably just use that cooked frozen salsa. But if I want to make something with a different flavor profile, I don't want oregano or some of the more like Italian flavored spices, because then I can't turn it into something else. If it's plain, but with, garlic and salt, then I can zhuzh it up with like, Cajun seasonings or, cumin and put it in chili and things like that. So that is why I am only adding basic seasonings. Don't worry. Seasoning is not an issue here. I love seasonings. If you've watched my organizing video, you'll see how many spice racks I actually have hidden in these cabinets, and that's not even all of them. So if you're worried about that, don't be. Sometimes it is good to start with like a bland, basic flavor profile. But we do want to add salt and things like that initially, because if you try to add salt later, you're never going to be able to make up for it not being in initially. So that's what I'm doing right now, trying to kind of pre-answer some of the questions you might have. I'll just speed up the chopping part because one, I'm not good at knife skills, and two, it's kind of boring because this one especially, there's not a lot going on. But it'll also show you just how quickly you can do something like this. Now, I have 5 pounds, which will probably cook down to not be as much as you would think. But this is something that you could do like a even smaller amount. If you just had this many tomatoes, you could cook it down and have just a little bit to freeze for later. Like maybe you bought a bunch of tomatoes for something and don't want to waste them and they're starting to get old, but you're like, I don't really, I don't want to make anything with them. That's kind of why I'm doing this. There's just too many tomatoes, and even if I tried to have tomatoes in like every meal this week, I'm just not going to probably use them all. But if I, make them into salsa, tomato sauce, something like that, then I will have them for future use. You can also just cook them down a little bit and have like not all the way to a paste or sauce. You can just cook them a little bit for like a diced tomatoes, that you might want to throw into something. So that's what I'm going to do. Hope you stick around and see the results because I'm going to show you this. Then I'll skip ahead the time because you're supposed to cook it down for 2 hours. Then I'll show you what the consistency is and show you the containers that I'm using and things like that. And then future video probably, I will show you if there's a recipe I use them in because I want you to see that yes, you can actually freeze things like this. Not everything freezes well, but depending on how you're going to use it in the future, some things do freeze well. So that could be another video if that's something you'd like to be interested in. Like what kinds of things could I freeze if I have extra, or if there's a good sale without it being like, it ends up going gross and it's a waste. So that's what we're doing. Once again, because I have that immersion blender, which if you don't know what that is, it's like a little handheld blender. A lot of people use them for like their beverages or whatever. But they have a big application in cooking stuff too. If you don't have one of those, you could also let it cool a little bit and pour it into a regular blender and just blend it up. But because I have a way and a plan to be blending, I am not going to be super worried about the chunks because these are making me cry. Because as long as they're soft and cooked, even if they're a little harder than the tomatoes, I could just blend them up and that wouldn't be a problem. You wouldn't want to, for example, I cooked this down and put this raw onion in and only let it cook for a few minutes. Because even though I could blend it, it would be kind of strong and it wouldn't cook down and meld with the flavors. Oh man, I'm gonna have to pause it or you guys are gonna think I'm having a moment. Which, I am that age, so I could be having a moment. I dealt with my onion emotions. This is gonna be kind of full, so I'm gonna try and pack all this in here and we'll see. Hopefully it all fits. Might have to cook down part of it and then add the rest, but I think it'll work. And like I said, it takes 2 hours, but you definitely do not want to have it too high of a heat. Because if you do that, especially the onions have a little bit of sugar and things like that, and they're just notorious, they will scorch and then everything's going to taste like burnt. So take your time, and I will put the camera closer when I'm doing that so you can see a little bit more, and I'll go into a little more detail on like the temperature and some things to watch for. So right now pretty full, but I'm going to add the garlic, onion, and lemon juice, but I need to wash my hands, so I'm going to do that off camera. I'm going to grab my sugar and put it over by my stove, but I'm not going to add it yet like I mentioned earlier. I just know myself, and if I don't put it over there, I'm going to forget. So I'm going to do the same with the lemon juice. If you're canning, they recommend you have lemon juice because there's such a wide variety of like the acidity of the oranges, and then you don't have a high enough acidity level, things can grow and you can get sick. However, I'm not canning it. I'm putting it straight in the freezer, and I don't want it extra bitter. So I'm going to wait and see, and if once I add the sugar, it can handle a little tartness, I'll add some more, but I'm not going to put any until I kind of taste how it is. What I'm going to add is some salt and garlic. I'm just going to eyeball. I'm not really going to measure. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm going to go light on the garlic because although I love garlic, I do still want to taste tomato and onion. I mean, it's not just garlic paste. Speaking of which, the tomatoes, you can use any kind you want. Not a problem. However, the best results are going to come from paste tomatoes. I don't know all the other varieties. The only one I'm familiar with is Roma's, but I know there are others out there. So typically not the kind of tomato that you would use to like slice for a sandwich or put on a burger. Those are usually bigger and more watery, so they don't condense down the same. However, cooking time will help you turn them into a sauce or a paste still. So if that's what you have, you can still do it. Don't worry. The reason I like Roma's is 1, the plant's not very big. 2, the tomatoes aren't very big. And 3, they tend to be not as bitter and acidic. At least they don't taste that way to me. And I notice they don't upset my stomach. And I have some other issues when things are too acidic. And so I had looked it up once, and yeah, they do tend to be less acidic, which is nice. They stay a little sweeter too. But yeah, you probably would not want to do this with cherry tomatoes. You could, but cherry tomatoes are very sweet, so they would be better in like if you like tomato juice or something like that, where the sweetness is, more of something you would want. All right, we're gonna put it on medium. Because I'm a little worried about scorching, I'm not gonna use my second burner. I'm just gonna use the small one. I have the time today, so I don't have to like worry that it's not cooking down fast enough and stuff like that. So I've got my stuff here just in case I need it. I'm gonna let that cook down. Okay, I actually am gonna switch to the second burner. Okay, I've got it on medium-ish. I'm also gonna use this because squishing it a little bit to get some of the juice out will help it to kind of start boiling up a bit. So I've got that. We'll see later on. I'll show if I have the, if the things are staying big and I need to use the immersion blender, I will show that up close so you can see kind of how I do that, but we'll see how this goes. I have done this before. I've done it in the crock pot actually, and cooked them down. So I'm actually gonna, one thing that you should know though is when you are cooking something and you want it to reduce down, you don't really want the lid tightly sealed because then the moisture is not going to evaporate off as much. I mean, it will eventually, but so I am going to tilt the lid. The only reason I'm having the lid on right now is just to kind of hurry up the moisture process to get it going. And then hopefully it'll get down to where it's cooking. I don't know if you can see this, my dinner recipe. So that's where we are. I'm going to stop it and I'll come back when it's cooked down a bit or when I have something to show. And then when it gets to the end and it really becomes like that, like thicker sauce, I'll show a close up over the top and kind of show what it looks like. So, okay, we're going to take a peek here, see how I've got the lid tilted. And this is why, look at all that moisture. See, if I leave it completely closed, it will end up being forever. And once it kind of cooks down, I may leave the lid off completely, but it just kind of speeds up this process. And I am going to stir because otherwise it can get kind of scorched on the bottom, but it's looking pretty good. Now that it's kind of cooking down a little bit, I am going to set my timer. I think I'm going to check it every 30-ish minutes because it does not seem to be, going too rapidly at this point. I'm going to turn it down a tiny bit. So see, I'm just doing it on like a medium low. And I will probably leave the lid off for now, just so that it cooks down a little faster. Once it's really starting to get soft, then I will do a little taste test and see if I want to add more garlic, salt, sugar, whatever. And I will let you know anything I add. But a lot of this, let me talk to you about this. But I mean, a lot of cooking and stuff, it comes down to tasting it and like checking it out for yourself. Like I'm going to think a certain amount of salt is good and you're going to think it's not enough or it's too much or whatever it is. So you really got to learn to taste as you go when you make stuff. Obviously, sometimes you can't when something's raw or whatever, but
for a lot of cooking, you know, once it reaches a certain point, it's safe, and you gotta teach yourself to do that and train your taste buds, because that's how you're gonna end up making good stuff. Also, just taking your time, you know, like this. Yes, if I was in a time crunch, I would probably try to hurry it along, but I'm not in a time crunch. I can take my time with this, and that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go find something else to do so that I'm in the area, you know, in the general vicinity, and I can hear, and I can come check in and stir it. But I'm going to think of it as just like a background project that I'm working on so that I can get other things done, but I'm also at the same time making something healthy and useful for our family. So I don't even know if I was looking at the camera half the time. Ah. Bye, guys. See you in a little bit once we get to a farther stage along.
Okay, this is what it looks like after about an hour. It's cooked down pretty good, but definitely not enough for like tomato paste or tomato sauce. So I think it will take the other hour. I have been leaving the lid on it tilted, and I did turn it up a little tiny bit more towards medium. So check back in a little bit. It's been about an hour and a half, so I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's really starting to thicken up. I am going to get out the immersion blender and just blend it up and then let it cook down for the last half hour. So that's kind of the plan right now. So I'm gonna do that and I'll show you. Okay, so this is what it looks like on the end of the immersion blender. See, there's a little thing, a little blade, and then just gets attached to this right here. Twist it on, plug it in. The only problem I found with this one is it does tend to splatter a bit, and I don't love that the cord is sometimes in the way, so I kind of hold the cord and then I start with the, let's see, lowest setting and just kind of pulse as I go. But it's hard because sometimes you can't quite see, and if I have to angle it to get some of the bigger pieces, it splashes. But so I'm gonna do that. I'm not really gonna show it because I don't think it really is that big deal, but once it's done, I'll show, you know, how much smoother and stuff. I had to put the lid on because as soon as I really kind of smoothed it out, I'm sure you can see it's like splattering all over the place. So it's nice and smooth now, but it's definitely bubbling a bit, so I'm turning it down. But it's definitely more the consistency of like a tomato sauce or tomato paste. So I also don't want to put the lid on too tightly. Like I mentioned before, we want to get that moisture out so that it condenses down. So I did turn it down though, just because it was splashing so much. And I'm gonna leave it for, I'm just gonna do probably 15 minutes, see where we're at. I'm also gonna need to taste test it at that point to see, in fact, I think I'll pull some out right now so it can cool, and then I'll see what seasonings we need. I taste tested it, and I'm glad I did not add the sugar early. They are pretty sweet. I might add a little bit for kind of like adding to the flavor. What is going on with my hair? That's all right. And even though they are a little tart, I may add the lemon juice. I haven't decided, but it definitely needs like a little more garlic, a little more salt. And even though I put that whole onion in there, I don't know that it tastes particularly oniony, so I may add a few more of those things. I'm just not gonna add anything that would take it, you know, one direction or the other flavor-wise, so that it's a lot more of a neutral thing. I also use this when I make, I have an Ethiopian cabbage recipe, and there's something else I thought of that I use it for, which is another reason why I just don't like to add the seasonings ahead of time. I want to say it's some kind of curry dish, but I don't typically put tomatoes in a lot of my curries. But anyway, if I think of it, I'll let you know. But yes, I'm very glad I waited on the sugar. They're pretty sweet, but if you are doing this from ones from the store or a different variety, you may need to add some sugar. That's why we taste everything as we go. The other benefit to this is, I mean, the same could happen if you canned it, but especially frozen. I'm gonna pull it out. I could season it at the time, you know, if it's a little bland or whatever. I think there's enough salt, but it might be shy on the salt too. And that is one thing, you should probably start with salt because it may have enough of the other flavors, but the salt really brings it out. That's why salt's so important. So I will kind of mess with it till I get it how I want. And then I'm just gonna pour it into some little freezer containers. I'm guessing I'll get about 4 or 5 probably 2-cup containers, which is plenty because that's about what it would be, you know, most recipes. That's another thing you could do. I know I say that a lot, like, oh, here's another thing, because that's just how my brain works. Is if you make specific recipes a lot, check the amount of tomatoes called for in that recipe and freeze it in those sizes or smaller, because you can always do a couple of containers that you can pull out and get ready, but you don't want a giant batch that you thaw and then don't use. So you want to make sure that you're using or freezing it in quantities that you will use, or can, you know, you can grab 2 containers if you need to for that time, but you don't want to freeze like 6 cups of tomatoes when all your recipes call for 2 cups. But if you froze them in 2 cups, that'd be okay, because even if you wanted to double the batch, you could just do more of them. So that's just something I was thinking of. I usually do things in about 2 cups, but now with the kids being gone, I may have to start cutting back and freezing and canning and preserving things in smaller amounts. I even thought about doing that. I got a sale on a type of roast that I like, and I was really tempted to cut them. But like I said, if I'm planning on my menu, I can usually think to myself, okay, I've got this beef, you know, since I did leave it as a bigger cut, I could make it something else out of it later in the week. So yeah, that's where we are right now, and I will do another video soon. Maybe a menu planning. I know not a lot of people make tomato sauce, but I really wanted people to see kind of like the concept of like, you can do a lot of things at home and you can save food in a lot of different ways. So thanks for joining me. Don't forget to check out my other videos. I try to do them in playlists. So, you know, if you're in a baking mood, there'll be a baking playlist and things, but I have all sorts of topics because I like to learn about and do all sorts of things. And I feel like it's kind of nice to have that like one-stop shop. So thanks for joining me. Check out my other videos, subscribe, and hit notifications if you want to find out when I'm doing something new. I also have Instagram if you're, you know, on YouTube, and then I have YouTube if you're on Instagram. So check those out. Yeah, that's me, just doing random things, and thanks for joining me on that adventure. Hello.